They didn't expect me to open that envelope. They certainly didn't expect me to show up. The rain had been tapping against the kitchen window since dawn, as if the sky itself couldn't decide whether to hold back or break. I sipped lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug, the kind no one ever notices in small apartments like mine. On the table lay the envelope, thicker than the usual bills, cream-colored and hand-addressed in ink, so deliberate it almost dared me to touch it. It had arrived that morning in the arms of Pete the mail carrier, who always smelled faintly of pine, and called me Miss Monroe with a half-smile that suggested he knew better. I hadn't expected anything special. Bills, maybe a flyer, but this Monroe Foundation annual gala, honoring Franklin Monroe's legacy. I nearly dropped it. At first I laughed, then I felt my stomach turn. Someone was playing games. Someone thought it would be amusing to remind me that I didn't belong. 12 years ago, they'd asked me to leave quietly with one suitcase and no eye contact. "We think it's best," Margot had said, as if exile were a favor. And now? This I turned the envelope over. No return address, but inside, nested like a dare, was the card, gold-embossed, elegant, grotesque. Franklin's name, my father's, gleamed beneath the chandelier design. Below that, scribbled in a hand I didn't recognize. "We trust you'll do the right thing." There was no signature, no warmth. Just an expectation of silence, of obedience, of absence. I stared at it until the ink seemed to blur. The last time I was in that house, it was for my mother's funeral. Margot stood at the top of the staircase, a vision in charcoal silk, not a tear in sight. Franklin had been quieter than usual that day, his fingers trembling when he tried to hug me. Margot had spoken for him. "We'll be handling arrangements privately. It's not your place." That phrase, "not your place." I thought I had buried it, but now it was back, rising in my throat like bile. I stood, my hands suddenly restless. I pulled open the second drawer in the hallway, dresser, past expired receipts and broken pens, until my fingers found it, a paper napkin, worn at the folds with the old Monroe Foundation logo embossed in faded ink. My mother used to bring them home when they were building the place from scratch, back when the word foundation still meant people, not PR. The apartment felt too small, too quiet. I needed something louder than memory. I powered on my phone. There it was. Franklin's last voicemail. 2 months before his death. I pressed play, knowing the words by heart. Sometimes the ones who scream the loudest are the ones hiding the most. His voice said, low and worn, "Don't forget who you are, Tess. Don't forget who you are." I looked at the invitation again. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about remembering. I walked to the bathroom mirror. My reflection stared back, half shadow, half defiance. I touched the glass like it might answer me. "You said I'd never walk into that room again," I whispered. "Watch me." Back in the living room, I sat at the desk. The RSVP link glowed on my screen, waiting. I pressed the RSVP button. 1 seat confirmed. Under a name they thought they erased. I didn't return to make a scene, but they made sure I'd never be invisible again. The doorman barely glanced at me as I stepped out of the car, his eyes flicking over my plain black dress with an expression that hovered somewhere between confusion and contempt. The valet hesitated before reaching for the keys, scanning the sidewalk as if expecting someone more appropriate to exit next. The Larkridge Hotel stood like a glittering fortress against the New York skyline, its chandeliers visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden light onto the sidewalk below. Inside, I could hear the delicate hum of a string quartet tuning between sets. It was a night designed to dazzle, and I'd arrived cloaked in everything they pretended not to see: memory, scandal, truth. At the check-in desk, the hostess scrolled down the tablet. Once, twice. Her polite smile faltered. "I'm sorry, Ms." she asked, already uncertain. "Monroe," I said evenly. "Tessa Monroe." She blinked. Whispers started somewhere behind me, like the rustling of silk against ego. She tapped again, then leaned toward the older man beside her. A quiet conversation, a concerned look, a forced smile. "It seems you're not formally on the list," she said, already regretting every word. But she rushed on. We can absolutely accommodate. Of course. There's a seat we can add, just at the back near the kitchen access. Only temporary. Of course. I nodded. That'll do. They thought putting me near the kitchen would humiliate me. They forgot I know how to serve. And strike. As I entered the ballroom, the scent of peonies and perfume met me like a wall. Everything sparkled floor-ceiling people. Waiters in crisp white jackets floated past with silver trays of champagne. Guests in floor-length gowns clustered around tables draped in cream linen, voices low laughter, tight. A donor grinned over a glass of rosé, while a board member adjusted his cufflinks mid-conversation. There was no warmth here, only polish. My seat was tucked near a swinging door where servers moved in and out with practiced precision. From here, I could see everyone, and no one had to see me. Perfect. A woman in emerald silk brushed past, glancing at my dress with a smirk. "Excuse me? Could I get 2 more glasses of the Chardonnay?" she said, waving her hand. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She looked confused for a second, then embarrassed and turned without apology. I sipped water from the untouched place setting in front of me. Near the stage, Ashley Monroe stood beside a reporter. Her posture, rigid smile rehearsed. Her eyes flicked toward me, once barely then away, as if I were a stain in the corner of a photograph. She hadn't changed much, still porcelain perfect, still pretending. Margot was harder to miss. She stood at the center of a small cluster of power and legacy, dressed in silver that shimmered every time she moved. Her laugh carried above the music, crisp and controlled. She met my gaze briefly across the room, nodded once, then turned her back. That was all the acknowledgement I'd get. Whispers passed from table to table like a contagion. "That's Tessa. Right? Did she sneak in? Is this a PR stunt?" I didn't flinch. I watched. When a server brushed past, he whispered, "Miss Monroe," under his breath. I hadn't heard that name spoken with respect in over a decade, and I felt it, something sharp and dangerous flickering just beneath my skin. The music paused, and Margot stepped onto the stage. She was graceful, practiced. Tonight we honor not just Franklin Monroe's vision, but those who have preserved it, nurtured it, and grown it into the foundation we cherish today. The guardians of its future, our board, our partners, our tireless family. Applause followed. No mention of my mother, no trace of the woman who had co-founded the entire thing. Erased just like me. I clapped once, softly, slowly. No one noticed. I reached for my glass again, the stem cool against my fingers. Then I looked up, and the glass nearly slipped. And then I saw him standing by the bar, fixing his cufflinks like nothing had ever gone wrong between us. Of all the ghosts to walk into that room, Miles was the one I'd buried deepest. He hadn't changed. That was the cruelest part. The same dark suit tailored to his lean frame, the same calculated calm in his posture, as if he were perpetually in control of the room, even if the room no longer belonged to him. His hair was just a little shorter, his expression more guarded, but those eyes, hazel with flecks of gold, were exactly as I remembered. And they were on me. He crossed the ballroom like it cost him nothing, like the years hadn't happened, like the silence hadn't bruised every corner of my memory. He was holding a champagne flute untouched. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. "Didn't think you'd still be wearing the ring." His fingers twitched just slightly. He didn't look down, but I saw it, the platinum band still snug on his left hand. A relic from a life he walked away from without a backward glance. "You always had a flair for timing," he said, "and you had a talent for leaving." The corners of his mouth curved, but it wasn't amusement. More like a man recognizing a battlefield he once conquered and wondering if it was still his. "Don't tell me you came for the shrimp cocktails," he said. I tilted my head. "I came for the truth." Miles glanced over his shoulder. Ashley was across the room talking to a photographer. Her hands moved nervously, tucking hair behind her ear, shifting her weight from heel to heel. She didn't look our way, but she didn't have to. Her entire body broadcasted unease. "I was invited," I said, by whom his tone was light, but his eyes weren't. "I gave him nothing." "You're still doing it," I said. What pretending? You don't already know the answers to questions you ask. He raised his glass, took a slow sip. Then maybe, I'm hoping you'll lie. The string quartet shifted to something softer. Around us, conversations dimmed to murmurs. He gestured to the rooftop exit. Come up for air. I hesitated, then followed. The rooftop bar was quieter, the skyline pressing in around us like a secret. The wind carried the chill of November, but I welcomed it. I didn't know you were still involved with the foundation, I said, watching the lights flicker across his face. I'm not, he replied. Not officially. Unofficially, he shrugged. I know things. A couple approached Stan and Marie, two of the Monroe Foundation's most oblivious longtime donors. Marie clutched her purse like a relic. Stan wore suspenders and a grin too wide for the occasion. Miles, you old fox. And who's this lovely creature? Stan asked, peering at me with the enthusiasm of a man who hadn't read a tabloid in a decade. Marie, I said flatly. It's Tessa. Tessa Monroe. Oh, her face froze, then brightened with fake delight. Of course, my dear, you look almost the same. We were just saying to Margot how odd it was not to see your name on the slideshow. Was that before or after they deleted my mother's from the memorial? I asked. They laughed awkwardly and shuffled off with plastic smiles. Miles exhaled. You haven't lost your edge. I didn't have the luxury. He studied me. If you're going to pull at threads, start with file 148B. I blinked. What's in it? Depends if they've destroyed it yet. What makes you think I'll believe anything you say? He leaned in, his voice low. I don't. But I think you want to find out. I stepped back. Don't pretend you're helping. His voice followed me as I turned. Not yet. Inside, the warmth hit me like a slap. I made my way through the corridor, past gilded mirrors and velvet drapes, until I spotted it lying on a janitor's cart, half crushed beneath discarded programs. A brushed metal nameplate, Samantha Monroe Caldwell, my mother's name. Trashed. I picked it up slowly, my fingers tightening around the edges. If they thought that was buried, they forgot I knew where all the bodies were kept. They wanted to see me carry trays. I gave them a toast they'd never forget. The ballroom had shifted. The lights were dimmer now, casting amber shadows over glass and gold. Waiters moved like ghosts between clusters of murmuring guests. Trays gliding above heads like silver wings. It was the kind of elegant exhaustion that followed an evening of excess champagne, running low, false compliments running high. I stood near a marble column, half hidden, when a waiter stumbled. A tray clattered against the floor flutes, bouncing, one shattering. The sound pierced through the hum, drawing glances. The waiter knelt, face flushed. Without thinking, I stepped forward. I crouched, helped gather the glasses, then stood tray balanced in one hand like it was second nature. A few people turned back to their conversations, but one didn't. Margot. She was watching me, wine in hand, a frozen grin spreading across her face like a mask that had waited all night to be worn. She leaned into a nearby donor and whispered something. They both laughed. Some people find their level, she said, just loud enough for her table to hear. The sting was sharp, deliberate, and that was the moment I stopped waiting. I walked, tray still in hand, toward the raised platform at the front. The microphone stood unattended, likely waiting for Margot's closing words. I climbed the 2 steps, heels clicking. Conversations paused. A soft gasp floated across the room. I didn't ask permission. I faced them. My name is Tessa Monroe. I began, voice clear, calm. I wasn't scheduled to speak tonight, but legacy's real ones rarely follow a schedule. The room went still. One camera flash went off near the back. I'd like to propose a toast. I continued, not to what's been written in the program, but to what's been erased. A few brows lifted. Ashley stiffened. Margot did not move. To the names that have vanished from plaques, and the stories that have been rewritten in marble. To truths that echo through gilded halls long after they've been silenced. To the people who built something from nothing and then watched as their memory was polished out like tarnish. My voice didn't shake. To those who have learned to smile while being asked to sit at the edge of a room they once called their own. And to those who think erasure is the same as victory, a pause, the kind that makes people forget to breathe. May your mirrors speak more truth than your mouths ever did. There was no applause at first, just silence, dense and heavy. Then a few claps, then more. Not thunderous, not celebratory, but enough to stir discomfort, enough to fracture the mask. I looked at Margot. She stood slow and deliberate and walked toward the stage. Her stilettos echoed like a threat. I extended the mic with both hands. She reached for it, and I said softly, "Your version of the story just got a sequel." I stepped down before she could speak. Flashes flickered again, press photographers, pretending not to aim directly. Guests whispered behind painted smiles. I didn't look back. Outside the ballroom, the air was colder than it should have been. A black car idled at the curb. I kept walking. Footsteps followed me, measured, unhurried. A man in a gray suit fell into step beside me. He didn't offer a name, just a card. Nora Wexler, attorney at law. As I walked out, one man followed, and he didn't work for the foundation. There's a reason they buried the past. It has teeth. The storm had followed me from New York back to Boston, as if even the weather knew this wasn't over. Rain tapped against my apartment windows, like fingers drumming with urgency. I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by boxes I hadn't opened in years. My modest apartment, once a sanctuary of distance, now pulsed with the ghosts of everything I'd tried to leave behind. The jewelry box was wooden and cracked at the corners. My mother's initials were still faintly carved inside the lid, along with a child's messy etching mine. I hadn't dared open it since the funeral, but something told me the invitation wasn't the only message meant for me this week. I lifted the velvet lining. Beneath it lay a yellowing notepad, brittle with time. My mother's looping handwriting spilled across the top page. Ledger entries, handwritten, dated just weeks before her death. And then I saw it code 148B, circled 3 times in red ink. My pulse stuttered. The note wasn't just about money. It was about silencing her. I didn't think. I pulled out my phone and opened the email thread from Miles. We hadn't spoken since the gala, and even then barely. But at 2:14 a.m., a message had arrived, without a greeting, without a sign-off. Just a line, "Go to Nora. Use your name this time." No signature. But I knew his cadence too well. By noon, I was standing in front of a nondescript glass building downtown, dressed in my best attempt at professional. Nora Wexler's office was tucked between a dental practice and a sushi bar, unassuming but oddly grounded like its owner. She didn't shake my hand when I walked in. She just looked me up and down as if measuring more than just my height. You're not the first Monroe to sit here," she said, closing the door behind me. "But you might be the last one who gives a damn." I liked her instantly. The office smelled like old paper and bitter coffee. Legal briefs spilled from folders along the shelves, and on one wall, a black and white photo of her younger self protesting outside a courthouse hung askew. She didn't fix it. She just gestured for me to sit. "I have documents," I began, "that suggest someone altered the foundation bylaws." She raised an eyebrow. "Someone, or Margot Caldwell." I didn't flinch. "Margot." Nora nodded, unsurprised. She pulled out a binder already labeled Monroe Foundation. Original deed, voting rights. "Miles said you'd come. He didn't tell me how much you knew." "Enough to be dangerous," I said. We worked through the afternoon reviewing the foundation's charter. According to the original bylaws, any amendment required a 75% board vote and the signature of the founding shareholder, my mother. But her signature wasn't on the post-2009 amendment that gave Margot the authority to restructure the board. "Do you know what this means?" Nora asked, sliding the original charter toward me. "I think so." "No," she said sharply. "I mean really. If we can prove the amendment is invalid, Margot's entire rule is a house of cards." That's when I played the recording, Franklin's voice buried in an old voicemail I'd saved out of spite and sorrow crackled to life. "Your mother never wanted this board," he whispered in the audio. "She wanted a circle, not a ladder." We forgot that. Nora didn't speak until the recording ended. Her expression softened. He sounds like a man trying to make peace at the end. I swallowed hard. He didn't get the chance. She leaned forward. Then we make sure you do. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The weight of 12 years pressed against my ribs. I wasn't just here to stir up old dust. This was a reckoning. Nora reached into a separate file and pulled out a thin folder. Inside was a photocopy of the original deed signed in ink by both of my parents. The numbers at the bottom didn't lie. 51%, she said quietly. Samantha Monroe Caldwell was the majority shareholder. I felt my stomach drop. And when she died, that majority would have passed to her legal heir, assuming no amendments or disclaimers. But they buried it, I whispered. They buried everything. Nora's voice was steady. Then let's dig it up. I wasn't just the outsider. I was the rightful heir. And they knew it. You can burn bridges, or you can walk across them with a torch. The clatter of Nora's mechanical keyboard filled the silence of her office like war drums. Legal forms, affidavits, timelines, everything had a deadline now, and that deadline was in 10 days. The board meets on the 15th, she said, underlining a date circled 3 times on her calendar. If we don't file by then, Margot will ram through an amendment stripping voting rights from any non-participating family heirs. That includes you. I didn't blink. So we file before then. Nora gave me a look. We file too early, she countersues, ties it up in court, and the meeting goes on without you. We wait too long, and she moves first. Timing has to be surgical. I looked at the wall beside her desk. It was covered with copies of old meeting minutes, revised charters, email printouts, even a scanned photo of my mother with the original foundation staff. Her face stared out at me, calm, certain, unafraid. I tried to channel that. She won't let this go easily, I said. No. Nora agreed. She'll go for blood. Outside, we found a quiet cafe near the courthouse. We sat at a window table. Her laptop opened my notepad, covered in scribbles that looked more like battle plans than legal notes. Nora sipped black coffee like it was ammunition. She doesn't think you're capable of this, she said. That's your advantage. I scrolled through my phone while she talked text messages, emails, voicemails, until one message from an unknown number slid into view. Miles. They're shredding docs on floor 4 tonight. No cameras after 7. I stared at it. Then I handed the phone to Nora. Well, she muttered, looks like your ex-husband still has a working conscience. Or a very guilty one. That night we didn't storm the building. This wasn't a movie. But we logged the tip, time-stamped everything, and emailed our paralegal to request any security logs from the building, citing suspicion of destruction of records. The paper trail had teeth, and now so did we. By morning, we were dressed for a very different battlefield, a charity brunch hosted by the foundation. Nora wore navy. I wore the same black dress from the Gala. I wanted them to remember. Ashley Monroe stood near the mimosa bar, stiff in designer heels and pretending not to see us. I didn't give her the luxury. I walked up chin high. You're either on the right side of history, I said quietly, or you'll be part of the cover-up. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her glass. I'm not involved in any of this. But you're benefiting, Nora added. Silence doesn't keep your hands clean. Ashley glanced around, likely searching for a way out. But the press wasn't watching us. No one cared what 3 women whispered in the corner. We subpoenaed the bank records yesterday, I told her. If there's anything you want to come clean about now, is the moment. She didn't answer, just walked away. But her silence was loud. That evening, back at my apartment, I stared at the wall now transformed into a full-scale operation. Printouts, strings of red yarn, sticky notes, a war room of one. Nora sat cross-legged on the floor, a pile of scanned board documents in her lap. Wait, she said, holding up a page. This resolution. It claims Samantha signed it on August 14th, 2012. I frowned. My mother died August 12th. We both went silent. She couldn't have signed, this Nora whispered. And this signature, it's traced. My stomach turned. We looked at each other. No more metaphors, no more vague betrayals. And suddenly, this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about a crime. The truth can be buried under marble and law, but sometimes it claws its way back. The clerk's name was Grant. His badge read, Assistant Records Supervisor, but the way he leaned back in his swivel chair screamed, I know who signs my paycheck. Nora stood beside me, posture crisp, every syllable deliberate. We're requesting limited-time access to documents pertaining to the estate of Samantha Monroe Caldwell, under Clause 4C of the Records Review Act, she said, handing over a signed affidavit. Grant didn't reach for it. I was told this request had already been reviewed. By whom? Nora asked. He blinked. Legal counsel from the foundation. And I'm legal counsel for her daughter Nora, replied, nodding at me. And the only one withstanding. Grant hesitated. Nora didn't blink. Eventually he sighed, took the paper, and typed something slowly into his terminal. You'll have 2 hours. No photocopying. No photos. Nora smiled sweetly. We'll take notes. The archive room smelled like cardboard and coal dust. Filing cabinets stretched floor to ceiling. This wasn't just history, it was control stored in manila folders. Somewhere in here, someone had hoped no one would look close enough. They hadn't counted on me. I started with the oldest section marked Board Resolutions 2008-2012. Most documents were typed, some yellowed, all stamped and signed. Nora combed the bylaws on the bench behind me, comparing changes in leadership appointments. My hands trembled as I flipped. And then I found it. A resolution dated November 20th, 2011. Title Amendment to Voting Structure, Emergency Clause Invocation. Signed, Samantha Monroe Caldwell. I stared at the date. She died on November 12th. Nora rose, stepped beside me, and took the page. This isn't a clerical error, she said. This is forgery. The signature was too clean, too precise, almost traced. It mirrored older ones too exactly. Nora snapped a mental photograph, lips pressing into a line. Grant, she called toward the door. Voice neutral, we'll be concluding our review in 10. We stepped outside, hearts pounding, but faces calm. In the hallway, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Tessa. The voice was familiar, glacial. Margot Caldwell. You're poking around in dangerous places, she said smoothly. You don't know what you're stepping into. I said nothing, just tapped the record button on my phone. You have your mother's stubborn streak, she continued. But she knew when to stop. She died, I said. She didn't stop. There's a difference. Her breath hitched just barely. Be careful. There are things in those archives that were never meant to see daylight. For anyone's sake. You mean for yours, I said. There was a pause. Whatever you think you'll prove, it won't matter. Not where it counts. Then she hung up. Nora looked at me. Please tell me you recorded that. I held up the phone. Every word. By evening, we were back at Nora's office. She sent a motion to the court requesting a preliminary hearing on grounds of suspected forgery and misappropriation of voting authority. We backed it with sworn statements. Franklin's audio, my mother's ledger, and now the document dated after her death. The court responded faster than expected. A hearing was scheduled for November 13th, 2 days before the board vote. When the email came through, Nora didn't smile. She exhaled. This freezes their vote. For now. I didn't allow myself to celebrate. Instead, I thought of the marble plaque at the foundation entrance, the one that no longer bore my mother's name. I thought of her signature dragged across a page by someone else's hand. And then I thought of Margot. For the first time, Margot looked worried. And that terrified me more than her confidence ever did. The louder the truth got, the more they tried to shut me up. It started with my mailbox. I came home that evening, umbrella-dripping rain on the worn doormat, to find the lock half snapped open. Envelopes were bent, half pulled from their sleeves, like someone had been interrupted mid-rummage. Bills, a letter from Nora, a flyer from the corner bakery. Nothing stolen, just touched. I bent down, heart thrumming, and ran my finger along the edge. A faint oil smudge. Not mine. Mr. Krieger. My landlord stood just inside the stairwell, mop in hand. 2 guys in suits were here earlier, he said casually, as if it didn't concern me. Said they were with the city. Code enforcement. My head tilted. Did they show ID? Nope. Just badges. Quick flash. No paperwork. Said they had to check structural integrity basement water lines or something. They go inside? He hesitated. Tried. I told them no entry without notice. But they asked where apartment 3B was. I stood very still. Look, I didn't let them in, Krieger said, eyes narrowing. But you might want to change your locks. You poked the wrong bear, didn't you? I went upstairs, locked the door behind me, and turned on my laptop. The screen lit up, but not to the page I left open. My documents folder had a recent access stamp. Files I hadn't touched in days were marked open today. My firewall should have caught that. I stared at the blinking cursor, something cold crawling up my spine. The document titled Voting Fraud Signed.pdf was still there untouched, or so it looked. I picked up the phone. Nora? I said the second she answered. They've been here. She didn't ask who. She already knew. Get everything off your hard drive. Cloud backups, external encrypted copies. No delays. We're playing chess against someone who rigs the board. She hung up before I could answer. I spent the next hour uploading everything to 3 separate encrypted clouds. I wrote a 1-sentence note to each journalist I'd vetted with Nora last week. Hold until November 13th. You'll know why. I attached the forged document, the one signed by a dead woman. Then I went outside. The laundromat was mostly empty. Machines hummed like tired lungs. I sat on the plastic bench, hoodie up, arms crossed. One spin cycle for my bedding, another for my nerves. The fluorescent light above me buzzed in flickers. The rain hadn't stopped all day. I tried to remember the last time I felt safe in my own skin. Probably a decade ago, before hospitals drained every penny, before Miles slipped out the door with silence instead of a goodbye, before Margot handed me a check and said, "Disappear?" quietly. I thought I had. Until now. Miles called. I almost didn't pick up. "You all right?" he asked. No preamble. Define all right. "They're pushing," he said, "trying to rattle you. It's not just intimidation, it's theater. Margot doesn't need you scared. She needs you paranoid." "Well, it's working," I muttered. A pause. "Don't flinch, Tessa. That's what she's counting on." I didn't answer. We both knew what flinching cost. Later, I ended up at the diner on 8th and Lexington, the same booth I used to collapse into after double shifts during Mom's chemo days. I used to count out coins for coffee. Now, I stirred cream into a cup I barely tasted, watching shadows move outside the rain-slick window. Funny how memories felt like bruises, old ones that never faded fully. I pulled out my phone again, refreshed the uploads, double-checked every timestamp. The documents were sent. My name was on them. And if anything happened to me, they'd go public. I took a long breath, steadying my pulse. This wasn't about proving I was brave. It was about leaving them no place to hide. And as I watched headlights blur past on the rainy street, I realized something deeper than fear had taken root. I wasn't scared. Not because they couldn't hurt me, because I had nothing left to lose. I thought I was the one playing defense, until I realized I'd become the threat. The morning headline hit like a punch to the chest. Disgraced daughter targets, Monroe Foundation in inheritance. Grab. I stared at the glowing screen on my phone, the bold serif letters sharp against the soft morning light filtering into my apartment. Beneath the headline was a photo of me from the Gala, mid-turn, eyes narrowed, looking every bit the antagonist they wanted me to be. The article was written by Trina Fields, a name I recognized, a name Margot had once dropped casually over brunch, bragging about how certain stories wrote themselves with a little incentive. The piece was poison. It claimed I'd forged documents to manufacture a claim over the foundation, that I had a known history of mental instability and strained familial ties. It painted my return not as a reckoning, but as a pathetic ploy for relevance. Nora slammed the paper on her desk as I walked into her office. "They're trying to kill your credibility," she hissed, pacing, "which means we're winning. But this?" Her voice trailed off. I folded the paper. "They're forcing our hand." She looked up. "Then we go public. Not with documents, with legacy. 2 hours later, Margot stood behind a podium draped in navy velvet, flanked by board members and smiling interns in matching foundation pins. The press conference was broadcast live, every local outlet covering it. She wore white. She always did when she wanted to look clean. "We honor Franklin Monroe's legacy, not with noise," she said calmly, but with vision. Reporters lapped it up. Some people, she added with a wistful smile, can't let go of grief. They cling to past narratives, trying to rewrite history. But we move forward. There it was, veiled enough to deny, pointed enough to devastate. I watched it from the back corner of Nora's office, arms folded so tightly it felt like my bones might crack. "I don't care what they say about me," I said, voice low, but she dragged my mother through the mud. "Samantha built that foundation. She named it after my father, but the roots, those were hers." Nora didn't respond. Instead, she pulled open a drawer and set something down on the desk between us. An old envelope, sealed, handwritten. I blinked. "What is this?" "Your mother filed it the week before she died," Nora said. "Marked private." I didn't open it. Wasn't my place. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. The letter inside was written in looping cursive, shaky in parts, but undeniably hers. I read slowly, lips moving silently over the words. "If anything happens to me, tell Tessa to fight. Not with fists, with truth. I fear Margot will change what this foundation stands for. I fear she already has. I made mistakes, but this isn't one of them. My signature means something. It ends with me." I couldn't breathe. The weight of my mother's voice so long, silence settled in my lungs like fire. She'd known. She'd seen the shift coming, and she tried to warn me the only way she could. Nora stepped back, giving me space. I folded the letter and tucked it carefully into my bag. The kind of care you give to something sacred. The pain in my chest didn't ease, but the direction of it changed. It didn't hurt like helplessness anymore. It hurt like ignition. I walked to the window, watching the world continue. Without pause, cars blurring past pedestrians, rushing headlines, updating. If they wanted to frame me as a villain, fine. I'd been underestimated before. But this wouldn't end with whispers. It wouldn't end in silence. If they want war, I'll bring a reckoning. But on my terms. Sometimes the truth doesn't shout. It waits in silence, in ink, in time. The file sat between us like a loaded weapon. Nora hadn't said a word in the last 10 minutes. Her legal assistant, Jamie, was reviewing the last affidavit, his brow furrowed in concentration. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the office windows, the sound constant and oddly soothing, a metronome, marking the hours before everything changed. 12 years of silence, of shame, of watching the foundation twist into something it was never meant to be. And now, everything we needed was on that table. The letter from my mother, Samantha, written days before her death and sealed for me. Her words still echoed in my head. Tell Tessa to fight, not with fists, with truth. The forged board resolution dated 8 days after her funeral, bearing her signature proven fraudulent by a handwriting expert. The audio recording of Franklin, his voice rasping through an old cassette. Margot changed things. I didn't agree, but I was already slipping. And the most fragile piece, a sworn affidavit from Harold Benton, a former board member. He hadn't wanted to get involved. Not at first, but when he saw the forged document, he'd quietly come forward. Said he'd been pressured to sign off on the changes. Said he'd stayed quiet for too long. Jamie exhaled slowly and leaned back. "This doesn't just prove fraud," he said, voice low. "It proves intent. Deliberate manipulation of bylaws. Deliberate forgery. If we present this cleanly, Margot's control collapses." Nora nodded, lips pressed tight. I stared at the pages. I had memorized every line, every signature, every margin note my mother had scrawled in haste. Some in blue ink, others in pencil, as if she hadn't dared write in permanence until she was sure. And now, it was all undeniable. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the email waiting in my inbox. Subject line, private offer. Immediate resolution. The body was 2 paragraphs long, carefully worded. From Mr. Ellison Counsel for the Monroe Foundation. They were offering a settlement. $500 then $2,000. Tax-free. No admission of wrongdoing. In exchange, I would sign a non-disclosure agreement and drop all current and future legal claims. I looked up, my jaw tightening. Tell Ellison he's paying for silence. I've waited 12 years to speak. Nora allowed herself a small smile. He won't be surprised, but he'll know we're not bluffing. We spent the next several hours preparing for the preliminary hearing. Jamie drafted copies of every document, triple-checked timestamps, and ensured every page had a chain of custody. The conference room we'd rented for the NOV 13 hearing wasn't grand. A neutral space tucked inside a midtown business center. But the court-approved judge would be there. So would Margot's counsel, and unofficially, so would half the press corps who'd been quietly tipped off. Trina Fields had emailed me earlier that morning. I know you don't owe me anything, but if there's a story to tell, I'd rather tell it right. Exclusive interview embargoed until the judge rules. No spin. Just your voice. I hadn't replied. Not yet. Because it wasn't about me anymore. It was about Samantha, about Franklin, about the truth that had been left behind in drawers and boxes and fading tape. Nora finished binding the final file and pushed it gently across the desk. This is it. I didn't move for a moment, just looked at it. The folder was a dull gray, unassuming. No logos, no flashy binder clips. But inside, it was the story they tried to erase. I reached out and rested my fingers on the cover. Not to open it again. I didn't need to. I knew every word. This is my mother's voice. I whispered, clearer than ever. Nora nodded. She's about to speak in a room they never thought she'd enter. That night, I slept 3 hours. Dreams came, fast flashes of my mother, the foundation, the smell of ink and polished wood. Of that day at the Gala when they looked through me like I didn't exist. Not anymore. By morning, the rain had stopped. The sun filtered through my apartment windows, pale and cold. I dressed in black, not to mourn, but to remember. Samantha had worn black the day she signed the original foundation charter. She believed in symbolism, in deliberate choices. Nora picked me up just before 8. We drove in silence. The courthouse loomed modest in size, but heavy in consequence. Outside, the press was gathering, murmuring, checking their notes. Inside, the judge waited. The truth file sat in my lap, still closed. Until it wasn't. Nora stood first, voice, steady eyes unwavering. Jamie followed, submitting the binder under oath. The judge took it, flipped through it, read silently. No objections. It was officially entered into the record. The first domino fell. On November 13th at 9 a.m., they will finally hear me. They wore pearls and silk and smiled like nothing could touch them. But truth doesn't knock. It storms in. The courtroom doors creaked open at 8:56 a.m. By 9:00, every seat was filled. The benches groaned beneath tailored suits and designer handbags. Journalists scribbled in shorthand, their phones muted but flashing with red recording lights. Behind me, a soft murmur of breathless tension passed through the room like static. I'd never felt smaller, and yet I stood taller than I ever had. Judge Raina Chu entered promptly, black robes, no nonsense. She glanced at the docket, then at us. Docket number 11352, Monroe vs. Monroe Foundation et al. We are here for preliminary hearing on filed motion to investigate governance fraud and ownership dispute. Her voice was calm, almost bored, like this wasn't the day the floor might split open beneath us. Nora stood. Your Honor, we submit evidence showing posthumous signature forgery, improper board amendment procedures, and documented suppression of voting rights tied to Samantha Monroe Caldwell's majority stake per original foundation bylaws. She spoke like a surgeon, precise, practiced, unforgiving. Margot didn't flinch. Sitting 2 tables down, dressed in pale cream and a diamond pin shaped like a swallow, she looked every bit the grieving philanthropist, composed, gracious, untouchable. Until I stepped up. Nora nodded to me. Miss Monroe is ready to give sworn testimony. I walked to the stand, took the oath, sat down. My name is Tessa Monroe. I am the biological daughter of Franklin Monroe and Samantha Monroe Caldwell. I am here to honor both. The first 20 minutes passed like a blur, laying groundwork referencing chain of custody, validating the audio recording of my father, the expert analysis of my mother's forged signature. But when Nora handed me the letter, the one my mother had left behind, my hand stopped shaking. I unfolded it slowly, the paper soft and familiar. She wrote this a week before she died. She asked her lawyer to seal and preserve it. She knew something was coming. I read it aloud. Tell Tessa to fight, not with fists, with truth. I fear Margot will change what this foundation stands for. I fear she already has. My signature means something. It ends with me. Silence. Even the court reporter paused. Margot stood abruptly. Objection. Hearsay, Your Honor. Judge Chu adjusted her glasses. The envelope is notarized and filed. Overruled. Continue. It wasn't just my voice they heard. Now it was Samantha's. Next came the forged board resolution. Nora explained how it bore my mother's name, dated 8 days after her death. Jamie had filed the death certificate to corroborate it. Margot's lawyer, Mr. Ellison, began cross-examination. Miss Monroe, would you describe yourself as estranged from your family? I stared at him. I didn't leave. I was erased. Is it true you've struggled with mental health, anxiety, depression? My mother died. My father deteriorated. My husband betrayed me. I survived. His mouth twitched. He tried again. Couldn't this be an elaborate revenge fantasy? Nora stood. Objection. Argumentative. Judge Chu nodded. Sustained? Stick to facts, Mr. Ellison. We moved on. Nora submitted Samantha's original voting certificate. Dated, stamped, found in her personal effects, notarized 5 years before her death. This document proves she held 51% voting control when the foundation charter was ratified. That control passed legally to Miss Monroe upon death. Judge Chu tapped her pen against the bench. I've reviewed the evidence and testimony. Given the material weight of the allegations and documents entered into record, this court will freeze all foundation voting procedures until completion of a formal investigation. Gasps. One board member dropped his pen. Margot turned to stone. I didn't exhale until Nora touched my arm. It was done. We stood. The courtroom emptied like a punctured balloon, silent, awkward, disbelieving. Some of the journalists approached, but Nora waved them off. Wait for the ruling to be posted. No comment. In the hallway, we paused near the elevators. My heart was still hammering, and then she appeared. Margot. No press. No photographers. Just pearls and power and fury. She leaned in close, her breath cool against my cheek. You don't know what you've started. I met her eyes. No, I said quietly, but I know how it ends. When they fall, it's not a scream. It's the silence afterward that's deafening. I sat in Nora's office the morning after the hearing, staring at the notification board file access granted. The ice had cracked, and now we were hearing the groan of something massive beginning to break. Margot's empire had never been made of stone. It was porcelain-painted gold brittle beneath the shine. Emails flooded in. A senior board member, Stephen Gray, had resigned without comment. Another, Lillian Cho, asked for a private meeting to clarify procedural matters. They weren't asking about my mother anymore. They were asking about cover-ups, financial trails, and who signed what and when. The doorbell startled me. I crossed the room warily and opened it to find Ashley Monroe. No makeup coat soaked through from the drizzle. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped inside, dropped a manila folder onto the table, and said she forged it. I saw the original years ago. I blinked. What are you talking about? The 2011 resolution, she said. I worked in the legal department back then. Tessa, the signature Margot submitted, it's not the one I remember seeing. Samantha's name wasn't on that document. Not until later. I sat down slowly. Why now? Ashley hesitated, her voice unsteady. Because I'm done pretending. I watched her gut the foundation in the name of tradition. I watched her erase Samantha. And then I watched you walk into that courtroom and say everything I didn't have the spine to. The folder was full of emails, internal communications about compliance flexibility, directives to shred duplicate files, notes marked keep verbal only. One stood out a message from Margot to a board liaison. We cannot allow the Caldwell inheritance to cloud strategic goals. Nora's hands shook slightly as she leafed through them. These are more than damning. They're coordinated obstruction. She built a firewall of intimidation, and now we've got the wires. Tessa, release it. I picked up my phone and messaged Trina Fields green light. Story's yours? No edits. She replied instantly, publishing at 2:00 p.m. sharp. Legal team on standby. Buckle up. At exactly 1:58 p.m., Margot stood before a row of cameras and reporters inside the Foundation's marble foyer. I watched from Nora's office, Ashley at my side, sipping coffee like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Margot's pearls glinted under the lights, her voice poised, her lies carefully calibrated. The Monroe Foundation remains committed to truth, transparency, and its founding values. Any personal grievances are unfortunate distractions. Is it true? Trina's voice rang out firm. But even that your stepdaughter has submitted evidence of document forgery under oath? Margot faltered. Just slightly, but enough. That's an ongoing legal matter. Did you instruct staff to destroy files related to board votes? Another reporter asked. I know. That's a gross mischaracterization. Her fingers tightened on the podium. Her smile stiffened. Cameras flashed. The room smelled blood. And then Trina's article hit the feeds. Monroe Foundation in legal crisis forged documents, internal cover-ups revealed. It was surgical. A summary of the court hearing, screenshots of the fake signature, quotes from Franklin's voicemail and Samantha's sealed letter, Ashley's anonymous confirmation. And at the center of it all, not just Margot Caldwell, but the institution she manipulated. The reaction was instant. Phones began buzzing. Margot's expression didn't crumble, it calcified. Her poise became a mask that wouldn't move. She concluded the press event with a brittle smile and a hurried exit, flanked by 2 rattled assistants. Ashley looked at me. You did that. I shook my head. We did. I wasn't on the outside anymore. I was at the center, and so was the fire. Power doesn't vanish. It leaks, bleeds, then drowns the one who held it too tight. The boardroom felt colder than it had any right to be, even with the late November sunlight filtering through tall, spotless windows. The long mahogany table, once Margot's arena of dominance, had turned into something else entirely. A tribunal. And she knew it. 3 board members sat stiffly across from her papers, in handbrows, furrowed with the kind of concern that precedes a coup. Mr. Halston. Her longtime ally spoke first, voice clipped. Until the audit is complete, we believe it's in the Foundation's best interest that you step down from all operational duties. Margot didn't blink. Her hands remained folded, her diamond ring flashing defiantly beneath the recessed lighting. You want a martyr, she said coolly. Be careful what you build your gallows for. But I saw it, that flicker behind her eyes. Not rage, not confidence, fear. By the time Nora texted me, the news temporary removal approved. Finances subpoenaed. I was already at the old Monroe townhouse, standing at the foot of the stairwell I hadn't climbed since I was 19. Margot wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. She'd be scrambling now, trying to stem a tide with a teaspoon. Franklin's study sat behind a carved door that still bore the grooves from when I slammed it shut the last time I saw him alive. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old ink. Nothing had changed his fountain pen, still perched neatly beside his blotter, the chair angled as if he might return any moment. I opened the bottom drawer of the bookshelf, the one that had always stuck. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, hand-numbered in Franklin's sharp looping script. It wasn't just personal expenses, it was everything. Real timelines of donations, discrepancies in staff payroll funds that were earmarked for community centers that never broke ground. Margot's public records told one story. Franklin's ledger told another. I traced my finger down the list of entries. One stood out: March 2012. Security expense coded under legacy support. Purpose unclear. Margot insisted. It aligned with what Nora had just uncovered in the subpoena. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed again, this time with a name I hadn't seen light up my screen in years. Miles. He met me at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse, still in that same navy coat, the one he wore to our engagement party. He looked older, but not wiser. I knew some of it. He admitted not meeting my eyes. Not everything. Just enough to be afraid. "Fear's expensive," I said. "You've paid it in silence for a decade." He didn't deny it, just nodded slowly. "You want me to testify?" "No," I said flatly. "I want you to decide if you can live with yourself, if you don't." He stared out the window for a long time. "If I do this, I lose everything." "You already did," I replied. "You just didn't notice when." He stood before I did, jaw tight. "Tell Nora I'll be there tomorrow morning?" I didn't thank him. Some people don't need absolution. They need a reckoning. The next morning, Miles sat under oath in a private deposition and confirmed what I already knew. In my bones, Margot used foundation funds to pay private firms, some for legal obstruction, others for surveillance. I delivered some of the envelopes myself, he said. I didn't know what was in them then. I do now. Nora's expression didn't change, but her pen moved faster. Afterward, back in Franklin's study, I laid the ledger gently beside Samantha's old journal. 2 voices, 2 ghosts, 1 truth. I had my last piece. And now, I was ready to bring the whole house down. I didn't want her thrown. I wanted her silence to end. The building still smelled faintly of dust and old paper. The library hadn't changed much since I was a child, still sunlit in the early morning, still carrying the echo of quiet laughter and tiny footsteps through the aisles. But something was missing. Something that once defined this place. My mother's name. The bronze plaque that once read, Samantha Monroe. Caldwell Reading Wing had been removed. In its place, a clean blank wall, as if memory could be scrubbed with enough polish. Joanne met me at the front desk, her voice tentative but kind. "We can put it back," she said. "It's overdue?" I didn't answer right away. My fingers brushed the edge of the shelf, the same spot I used to sit under while my mother read donation letters aloud. Her legacy wasn't meant to be grand. It was meant to be kind, quiet, steady. She believed in books before buildings, children before donors. Margot was gone, resigned under the weight of sealed documents and board pressure. The foundation had voted to install interim leadership, and Nora had carefully walked me through the legal transitions. There would be no parade, no press release about Margot's fall. Just silence. And for once, that silence felt earned. Nora offered one final path. We can still pursue criminal charges. Wire fraud. Forgery. She won't walk away clean. I stared out the window of her office, watching as the city blurred in the afternoon light. "Not now," I said. "Let her live in the wreckage she built." Justice didn't always come with handcuffs. Sometimes it came with absence. Later that week, Ashley invited me to walk through the administrative wing. She didn't say much at first. She seemed lighter, like a stone had been lifted from her chest. Maybe several. She hated when I asked questions, she said finally, especially about Samantha. "I know," I replied. She erased what didn't fit her story. Ashley paused in front of the old financial archives. "You're not her," she said quietly. "You're better." The words didn't land like praise. They landed like a responsibility. We stood together in the reading wing, staring at the wall where the plaque once was. Joanne returned with a small envelope. Inside was the original dedication inscription. I ran my thumb over the raised lettering. It was warm from her hands. That night, I stood on the rooftop of the foundation building. The city pulsed below me, indifferent but alive. I thought of all the wounds this place had left on me, on my mother, on those who tried to do good and were silenced for it. But I also thought of what could still be healed. The next morning, I drafted a proposal for the Samantha Caldwell Scholarship Fund, targeted toward women in law community work and literacy programs. I sent it to Nora and Joanne, Build it however you think she would have wanted it, I wrote. When the foundation held its next public event, I stood behind the podium, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as someone who carried something forward. Someone who was done surviving and ready to speak. This is not a legacy of silence, I said. It's a future of reckoning. The applause was hesitant at first, then steady, then loud. Afterward, a reporter cornered me near the stairwell. Young, bright-eyed, probably her first real scoop. "Will you stay and lead the foundation?" she asked. I didn't answer yet. They had the power. I had the last word. The Monroe Foundation Hall looked different this time. Not in structure, it still stood tall columns gleaming beneath the soft evening lights, but in atmosphere. The hush that once cloaked my entrance was gone. No more side glances. No one mistook me for the help. I wasn't invisible anymore. Joanne greeted me near the entrance, her smile unforced. "They've been waiting for you." Inside, soft music drifted through the marble corridors. Rows of foundation staff and familiar faces lined the hallway. Donors stood shoulder to shoulder with librarians, old board members, with children from local programs. The room didn't feel like Margot's anymore. It felt like something new had taken root, something honest. At the center of the newly renovated children's wing, covered in dark velvet cloth, was the plaque. A spotlight beamed down as I stepped forward. No speech, no preamble. I simply pulled the cloth away. Samantha Monroe, Children's Wing for those who were silenced. Gasps rippled quietly through the crowd. Some clapped, others wiped away tears. Joanne placed a gentle hand on my back. "It's finally hers again." A journalist stepped closer. "Ms. Monroe, what do you want the world to remember?" I looked past him, past the lights and cameras. My eyes landed on an older woman in the back, her granddaughter clutching a donated book. That stories don't end when someone stops telling them. They just wait. There were still skeptics, of course. A few murmured their doubts into glasses of wine. Others avoided eye contact altogether. But more than once, someone approached with quiet apologies, not for what they had done, but for what they hadn't. That silence, I had learned, spoke volumes. I didn't stay long. Slipping away from the reception, I walked the familiar blocks alone, cold air threading through my coat. The library doors creaked slightly as I pushed them open. Dim, empty, perfect. Dust curled in soft swirls through the light. I moved through the aisles by instinct, fingers trailing along the worn spines. There it was, Jane Eyre, my mother's favorite. She used to say it held everything a girl needed to understand the world, injustice, resilience, and the will to define yourself outside of someone else's shadow. I pulled the book from the shelf and held it a moment before sitting at the old wooden desk, the same desk she once used with the scratch in the corner where I carved my initials at 10. I opened my journal fingers, hesitant for the first time in weeks. "You were right, Mom. They couldn't bury us forever." The words bled onto the page in slow, deliberate ink. Not rage, not revenge, just truth. As I closed the cover, a low buzz vibrated from my coat pocket. Unknown number. I hesitated, then picked it up. "This is Tessa Monroe. Fade to black." They told me silence was noble, that swallowing injustice would somehow preserve dignity. But I've learned silence doesn't protect you. It erases you. If you're reading this and you've ever been cast aside, underestimated, or told you didn't belong in the room, then you know the sting I carried for 12 years. I wasn't always strong. I wasn't always brave. But I chose to speak, not just for myself, but for the voice that could no longer speak my mother's. And maybe in some way for yours too. So if you ever doubted yourself, if the weight of someone else's power made you feel small, I'm here to say it's not over. You're not done. Stand up, even if your voice shakes, especially then. To those who walked this story with me, thank you. Your belief became my spine. Every betrayal I endured sharpened the edges of my truth. In every moment I wanted to give up, I remembered why I couldn't. Not because I needed revenge, but because I needed to restore something, sacred legacy, dignity, memory. If you take anything from my journey, let it be this: speak. Even if they try to drown you out, speak and someone will hear. I promise.